Good morning, crime scene community. I'm here to read out another chapter of Poisoner in Chief. If Gottlieb was found guilty, it would be a real first. Damn, Secretary of Defense Harold Brown shouted at an aide one summer morning in 1979. There may be a book coming out any day on these programs. Brown knew that he and his colleagues in Washington were about to face. The researcher, John Marks, who filed the Freedom of Information Act, requested that led to the release of the surviving MKUltra documents and received more than 16,000 pages. For nearly 2 years, he and 4 assistants combed through the catalog. By the time he was ready to publish his findings, he knew more about MKUltra than anyone other than those who had run it. Marked as a bearded 44-year-old Cornell graduate who had volunteered to be a State Department officer in Vietnam in order to avoid the military draft. In 18 months there, he returned home and went to work for the legendary Ray Klein, a veteran CIA officer who had become Chief of State's Department Office of Intelligence and Research. Later, he quitted the State Department. Marks met his renegade CIA officer, Victor Marchetti. In 1974, the two of them published a book, The CIA and the Cult of Intelligence, that revealed much about how the agency worked. Marks maintained his interest in hidden CIA operations. After reading the Rockefeller Commission report in 1975, he wondered if MKUltra documents had really been destroyed. That hunch led him to file the search request that ultimately turned up his trove. The book that emerged from Mark's research was called The Search for the Manchurian Candidates, the CIA and Mind Control. It was the first comprehensive examination of MKUltra. The counterintelligence historian Thomas Powers wrote in an introduction that it expressed 2 dominant attitudes: fascination with the discoveries of psychological researchers, the anger with their misuse by the CIA for purposes that were narrow and morally careless. He was also amused about Gottlieb. Sidney Gottlieb, alias Victor Schneider, secured his place in history by his efforts to provide toxins for political murder, in an effort he played only under a pharmacist's role. More sinister was his sponsorship of research to find a way to make assassination routine by turning ordinary men into abominations that would kill on command. Facing up to the fact that an attempt had been agony through, the heart quails to think of the catastrophe of success. What if Gottlieb and his researchers had succeeded in their wildest dreams, and no secret nor the life of any enemy had been safe from the CIA? The agency's masters have been prey to lethal daydreams about many opponents for the last 40 years. Castro, Ho Chi Minh, Sukarno, Lumumba, Gaddafi, De Gaulle, Nasser, Chow En-lai, Khomeini. How could the United States have resisted the temptation to remove these inconvenient figures? It could only have been done in confident security. Owing agents books and soul, attractive in theory, would have given us much to regret, to deny, and to hide. But Providence is kind and blessing with a failure. The search for the Manchurian Candidate clearly identifies Gottlieb as the director of the MKUltra. It includes dozens of references to his life and work. The appearance of his book in 1979 ensured that he would not be forgotten. Only 33 years old when he took over the chemical division, Gottlieb was managed to overcome a pronounced stammer and a club foot to rise through agency's ranks, Marks wrote. Greatly respected by his former colleagues, Gottlieb, who refused to be interviewed for this book, is described as a humanist, a man of intellectual humility and strength, willing to carry out, and one ex-associate put it, the toughest thing he had ever done. As Marks was publishing his book, a two-man victims task force was at work inside the CIA. Director of Intelligence Stanfield Turner had created it after receiving that one internal memo called a surge of letters from people who had heard descriptions of MKUltra experiments and suspected that they or their loved ones had been victims. The task force could not satisfy them. Each received a simple answer. Unfortunately, the files available to date do not contain the names of any test subjects. Turner reported to Attorney General Griffin Bell that fragmentary records and amnesiac recollections made the task of identifying MKUltra victims well nigh impossible. Although the victim task force did not find lists of victims' names, one of the members, a CIA officer named Frank Labinger, extracted a bit of new testimony from Gottlieb. As his task force was ending its work in 1979, Labinger sent Gottlieb a letter asking 8 questions about MKUltra. They were broadly framed and hardly threatening. 10 days after he received them, Gottlieb answered by telephone. Labinger took notes. Unwitting tests were performed to explore the full range of the operational use of LSD, he wrote. Both intrigation and provoking erratic behavior were of interest. Gottlieb remembers no breakdown of tests and no accurate count of tests. As he recalls, the number was probably about 40. He recalls nothing which would identify any specific tests or test sites. Publication of John Marks' books interrupted Gottlieb as he was settling into what he hoped would be a new life. I didn't read that book, and I make it a practice not to read books like that, he later testified. I did see some gallery proof about the book that Mr. Marks sent me. I felt that it was so accurate and outrageous that I sent it right back. He wanted to make me whatever corrections I felt were called for. I made no corrections, and I told him in a letter that I sent him that rather than make corrections in the book, in order to make the book more accurate, I would have to rewrite it. I did not want to do that. Around the time this unwelcome book appeared, Gottlieb made a decision that took him further away from his former life. At the age of 60, he enrolled to study at a master's degree in speech therapy at San Jose University. Having stuttered for his entire life, he wanted to spend his later years helping children who face the same challenge. Service would be part of a continually active life. Sid is going to school in San Jose 2 days a week and getting all A's, Margaret wrote in a letter to relatives. He's going to start sailing lessons today, and gracious knows what that will lead to. We go to various kinds of dances 4 or 5 times a week. And to top it off, we got a 5 by 9 rug, which we are hooking together, and he is doing most of. We go wine tasting in Santa Clara Valley. He has been hiking around the Sierra Club once or twice. We have been down to Monterey and Carmel, and a couple of times we drove up to Napa Valley. We were friends from our college days in San Francisco, whom we visit once in a while. Gottlieb maintained that his gentle pace for 2 years. In 1980, after receiving his degree in speech therapy, he and Margaret decided to return to Virginia, where he had spent most of their married life. Their new home was a 5,000 square foot eco home in the shadow of the Blue Ridge Mountains, where Uncle Bob McElwain lived. No coincidence. Near the end of a long, winding gravel path called Turkey Ridge Road. The entire place was powered by the sun, and there was a large doorway with wheelchairs. One of Gottlieb's CIA colleagues recalled years later, Gottlieb was fascinated by the concept of building a place to die. He spent a lot of time with mechanical and physical puzzles. There was a lot of areas for art projects. The homestead was essentially a duplex where there were 2 identical homes, one for the Gottlieb couple and one for the younger couple who would take more and more responsibility for the older couple as they neared their death. There was a common room where the couple would dine together, but the concept didn't work out in practice. Even though Gottlieb gave the younger couple a deed to part of the house, they did not get along. Gottlieb called his new estate Blackwater Homestead. Related to Black Rock, huh? After the stream that ran through it, he and his wife, along with the younger couple with whom they lived, raised goats and chickens. They grew vegetables, fruit, and herbs. Gottlieb built a sundial. The figurine was an Oriental warrior, guarded it all. Blackwater Homestead, by one account, became the kind of spiritual retreat and the focal point of a growing community who found in Gottlieb a charismatic soulmate. Gottlieb enjoyed the pleasures and demands of life on the land. He spent early morning in meditating while kneeling on pillows and burning incense. That's what I do. I burn a lot of incense here for Gary Hinman. Then I would ride his bicycle into town to buy newspapers and collect his mail. He drove a used car and wore sandals. One of his friends described him as an old hippie. The transformation was complete. According to the profile that the Washington Post published years later, it was as if Gottlieb has lost his former self, walking backward, sweeping the trail clean with a branch. In his first life, he had explored how to control the minds of others. In his second, he had gained sway over his own recollections, granting him immunity and a fresh start. Most people in Rappahannock County had no idea Gottlieb had ever worked for the CIA. His virtue was unquestioned, his counsel sought after, his company prized. Rather than retreat into his memories, Gottlieb embraced community life. He joined the Plan Board and the Arts Council, acted in Christmas plays, and helped organize town festivals. Margaret was just as active. Since suburbia had taken over our former haunts, and since our oddest and dearest friends still lived in around the same area, we found a place within driving distance, but out in the country, and I hope far enough out so that suburbia won't catch up with us again before we die. And she wrote in a letter to relatives, I have never been comfortable living in the city or our quite isolated city. Home fills me with peace and quiet. We are in a very rich and close community with all kinds of things to do. I teach with the literary volunteers, people who have not finished high school or non-readers. I go to the county jail once a week for this, and I work in the elementary school too. Sid spent 3 years in the local middle and high school, being a speech pathologist. He also works with the hospice, and in our spare time, we raise a good deal of our food we eat. In 1982, Gottlieb's older brother, David, died, giving him a chance to muse about paths not taken. David Gottlieb had been riveted by a childhood visited by Boyce Thompson's Institute for Plants Research in Yonkers, New York, and built a lab in the family basement to study plant biology. His interest was divisive in attracting Sidney to the field. He attended City College, as Sidney did, and he went on to join the facility of the University of Illinois. Over the course of an illustrious career, he co-founded the university departments of plants pathology, discovered antibiotics, lectured around the world, served in the editorial boards of professional journalists, and mentioned budding agricultural biologists. I have accumulated a number of honors from my professional colleagues that have brought me to a pleasurable sense of being valued, David Gottlieb said at one ceremony. Although I have enjoyed receiving these honors, I have often wondered why I have not been more moved by them. Perhaps it is because I see life as imperfect and destined to remain so. Despite the loss of his brother, Sidney Gottlieb was entering what could have been rewarded autumn of his life, and he lived close to nature. His friends admired his civic passion. He could claim the quiet satisfaction of one who devotes himself to the good of others. The past, however, always hung over him. In 1984, the CIA, facing a steady stream of inquiries, issued a public statement on MKUltra. What did not mention his name and referred to questionable research experiments. In 1983, after questioning were raised within the agency by the Inspector General about the propriety of these sub-projects, they were discontinued. The statement said safeguards were subsequently promulgated through presidential executive orders, which had been strictly followed. Years later, a telephone reporter ambushed Gottlieb near his home, published a microphone into his face, and asked if he had any regrets about MK Ultra. I do not want to talk about it, a haggard-looking Gottlieb said, as if he turned away from the camera. It's a right that you have and that I have. I have gone to other parts of my life. That's in my past, and I'm going to stay there. We're going to stop here and continue on about the story with Frank Olson and MK Ultra and Gottlieb tomorrow, as they're continuing about Frank Olson's death. And it is very important because he was apparently the only CIA operative to ever be punished by the MK Ultra program, other than the ones that they procured and put in the program, like me. Have a nice day. If you think I'm enjoying showing you any truth here, please like, share, and subscribe.